The end is nigh. The end is nigh. Hey everybody, this is Lee with Fanatic Comics, and bringing you another one of my lunchtime ramblings. So, there's a lot of talk about all of this craziness in the comic book industry, and with Dan Didio leaving DC Comics, that it's a sign that maybe DC might get sold. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's look at some basic numbers. If you look at AT&T, DC Comics is like, what, less than 0.1% of their total income. They sold DC Comics. The income, if they got full price, it would allow them to have funding for, what, 3-4 days maybe, if they're lucky. AT&T is far better off keeping DC Comics than selling it, because the IP is worth more. They'll actually make more in the long run. They've got a complete history of comics that they can draw on. This will help them in the future for streaming, for movies. It would be ridiculous to do this. So I don't think that's going to happen. It would be in their worst case scenario. So, what does all this mean? Well, let's look at the facts and the numbers. Right now, Valiant is tanking. Don't know what Bloodshot's going to do for them. Don't know how Bloodshot's going to do in the movies. I haven't really noticed the trailer all that much. I've seen a couple bits of it, and it didn't appeal to me. But hey, I've been wrong about movies before. So, having said that, what's going to happen? Well, the comic industry goes through a cycle about every 10 years, and we've skipped the big one. You know, in the 50s, we had the Comic Code Authority come in, and it changed comics forever. Then in the 60s, all of the romance comics and horror comics started to dwindle away when we were introduced to superhero comics. The big superhero comics from Marvel. They gave us a more realistic worldview, and so we got to see superheroes having the same struggles and problems that we had, even though in the 60s, DC was still doing the Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Superman, Millie the Model. Oh, why is Superman kissing Poison Ivy? Why is Robin kissing Batwoman? You know, those issues just drove me crazy. But that was, that's what DC knew, and that's what they had been doing, and it was working for them, but they were losing their butt. Then in the 70s, DC nearly went bankrupt. Marvel Comics was having a renaissance. Then you had the 80s. And the 80s was the boom. It seemed like anything that Marvel made was gold. Anything that DC was doing with its new influx of ex-Marvel artists and writers, George Perez, Marv Wolfman, Steve Ditko, the list goes on. They had a huge influx, plus with the popularity of Legion of Superheroes. But here's what also changed. 1977, ElfQuest came on the market. ElfQuest started, and I constantly refer back to this, but ElfQuest was a pivot point in indie comics. And the indie comics boom took off. We had we had comic companies, Comico, we had First Comics. Trying to think of all the ones that were out there. Warp Graphics, RAK Graphics. Man, there were just so many. And I'm just doing this off the top of my head. We had ElfQuest, we had E-Man, we had Grendel, we had Nexus, Badger, DNA Agents, Dreadstar, gosh, and the list, and again, the list goes on. So what happened? Those comic companies ended up collapsing. Why? Too many of the indie companies were putting out garbage, and in turn, they all went under. There was a glut. Marvel and DC saw how these indie comics were doing well. Many of them were. Grendel, Matt Wagner was doing awesome. Comico was doing fairly well. First Comics was doing okay. But they were competing against Marvel and DC. So Marvel and DC just flooded the market. Glutted the market out to the point where indies could not survive. And there were a lot of other crap as well. Junk books being put out, etc., etc. So in turn, a lot of these indie comic creators collapsed. The Comico went under. First Comics went under. So where does that all come into play now? We're looking at the same thing. There's a huge glut in the market. There are so many books. There are too many books, not enough buyers. Whereas in the 80s, there were tons of buyers. I mean, we were talking, Marvel was, their mainline comics were doing 100,000 copies minimum. If a book dropped below 90s, I think like 91,000, they canceled the damn thing. So today, we have far fewer buyers, far more books than ever before, and everybody's competing for pennies. And we're about to witness the same collapse. The indie market is about to go bust. Who's going to come out and survive? It's hard to say. Valiant is hurting. Boom is booming. Image is holding steady. IDW is painfully hurting. What is going to happen in the next 18 months is anyone's guess, but the next 18 months really are going to tell us all what's going on. Marvel and DC are not going anywhere. This whole idea and notion that somehow Marvel and DC are going to go belly under, that has been spoken, I can't in all the 45 plus years that I've been collecting comics, I have heard that so many times. It's not going to happen, especially now with Disney and AT&T involved. These are big conglomerate companies. They're not going to wipe away all of this potential money. And it's a very insignificant amount in their overall budget. So we're not going to see Marvel and DC disappear. We are, however, going to see a lot more independent comic creators go belly up. Indiegogo numbers are down. Kickstarter comic numbers are down. People are either making junk books or they're flooding the market and oversaturating the market to the point where nobody can get in. Nobody has a niche hole or a firm grip on the market. Coffin Comics is doing a great job holding their own, and because they've been at it for a while and have a good, steady clientele, consistent clientele, they're going to survive. Chances are they'll survive. Everybody else, man, we're all struggling for those pennies and dimes. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Keep that in mind that we definitely are going to see a change in the market. We're going to see a significant change in this industry, and it's going to happen rapid. When the indies started to collapse in the 80s, it was quick. It was like overnight. Boom. One day they were here, the next day they were gone. It will happen the same way. One day they were here, and the next day is gone. And I'm going to tell you something. I have heard so many YouTubers say how indie comics, man, we're going to compete against Marvel and DC. Y'all make me laugh. Name one. I want you to name me one. One comic, one indie comic that has gone mainstream and has been able to compete against Marvel and DC. There ain't one. You could make the argument that maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they went mainstream. But is there anybody else? Really? Anybody? No, I can't think of any. So, having said that, indie comics are never going to compete against Marvel and DC head-to-head, toe-to-toe in a big market. Something so spectacularly unheard of would have to happen. So, everybody out there speculating or saying or pontificating about how they're going to upset the mainstream comic industry by what they're doing? No. Y'all crazy. Absolutely stark, raving mad. But you can cut a little piece of that pie for yourself and enjoy it. Because that's what you should be doing. Don't worry about what Marvel and DC does. They'll take care of themselves. Big boys always do. It's all of us little guys. And cutthroat and everybody, stabbing each other, trying to murder people through character assassination. Man, people, you'll pay the price for that in the end. Don't let that be the road you take to fame and glory. Be professional. Get your product out there. Show everybody what you can do. Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody's going to judge you on. Okay, so enough of my lunchtime rambling. Y'all take care. Be good to one another. Have a good day.